Hello and welcome to Storytime with the Courier-Journal. My name is Mick Sullivan and I am the host and creator of The Past and the Curious, which is a podcast you can find wherever you find your podcasts. It's free and it's for families. I'm also the manager of youth and family programs at the Frazier Museum, and I also am the author of this book called The Meatshower, which I'm going to read to you right now. This was inspired by a real-life event that happened in Kentucky, and I think it is the strangest event that you could possibly imagine. But it is a real thing. And a lot of the story is real. Obviously, the piece of meat that can talk, that's the narrator of the story, not real. But much of it is. So I hope you enjoy. This is called The Meatshower, the mostly true tale of an odd and somewhat edible occurrence, by Mick Sullivan, and illustrated by my friend Shay Goodlett. It's just a fact. Sometimes strange things happen. And you're most certainly going to think this is a strange story. But it's a tale as true as the leaves in the trees. Why, it's as real as this very jar on this very shelf. The same one that I call home. Maybe you've heard about that famous tsunami of Sticky, the Great Molasses Disaster, as it's known. That was unusual, but easy to explain. A giant storage tank exploded and sent a tidal wave of gooey brown sweetness slowly creeping through the streets of Boston. Or, there was the time that giant flock of birds just plumb fell right out of the sky with nothing more than a thunder of thuds on the ground. Some folks call that one the Louisiana blackbird tragedy. Believe it or not, I've heard something similar has happened with frogs. But if you're really, really looking for something strange, I'll tell you. There is nothing quite like what happened in the little town of Olympia Springs, Kentucky, one March day in 1876. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but that's the reason I'm here, so I'm going to tell you anyway. Mrs. Crouch, there's Mrs. Crouch, was gathering supplies to make a batch of soap. Making soap is a hot, smelly job, so she typically worked in the yard, and the weather seemed perfect for that task. Before she opened the door, she heard a sound from the roof above her. At first, she thought it was a spring shower, but it didn't sound quite like the rain that she knew. It fell at odd times, not the steady, gentle pity-pat of a shower's first raindrops. It was a heavy, flat sound, a thunk against her old tin roof. Out the window, she saw nothing unusual, but then she heard a few more thunks. It smacked her face with a sloppy slap and slid, slimy and slow, down the soft skin on the side of her face. She caught her breath and then broke the silence with a shriek. Her husband, kindly Mr. Crouch, came running from the barn as she screamed, "I got hit in the face with a piece of meat!" As matter of fact as someone can be, in such a peculiar situation, her dear husband calmly replied, "I know, there's meat falling all over the place. It's a meat shower." "A meat shower!" she screamed. "There's no such thing! Meat doesn't fall from the sky." Now, that's most generally true. Meat does not normally fall from the sky. But that day, Mrs. Crouch was wrong. On the 3rd of March in 1876, in the little town of Olympia Springs, meat did fall from the sky. Before long, the neighbors gathered on the Crouch's porch, confused and excited. A few carried umbrellas. One was toting a shovel. Another had a rake. Ben was the last to arrive. He was excited and hungry and ready to make the best of the shower. Pointing with pride to the pail in his hand, he exclaimed, "Look, it's almost full of meat rain. Guess what's for dinner tonight?" Now, this idea horrified Mrs. Crouch. Ben, I think that's a terrible idea. You shouldn't eat meat that fell out of the sky. You don't even know what it is or where it came from. What if it makes you sick? Please, she begged, empty that pail of meat. She was most probably right, but Ben saved a little, just in case it was delicious. This is one of the townsfolk. Like all normal showers, this strange meat shower eventually came to an end, and now perplexed by the strange chunks scattered about, the people of Olympia Springs set to solve the mystery, but they would not be alone. The next morning, newspapers from the Carolinas to California ran the story. No one had ever heard of such a bizarre happening. It was the talk of the nation, and before long, the place was crawling with scientists, meteorologists, and butchers. Everyone was hungry for an explanation to the mysterious meat from the sky. Specimens were packed up and sent to labs all over the country, while in Olympia Springs, people guessed and gossiped and waited for an answer. This is my favorite illustration in the book. One scientist said it was horse meat. I guess he thought a horse just up and exploded and shot meat all over the place. Can you imagine? Not likely if you ask me, and besides, no one in town reported missing any horses. Another scientist speculated that the meat shower was the product of a kettle of vultures, which is the name for a flock of vultures in flight. In this hypothesis, a big group of those birds had just feasted on a giant meal, and then, when they started to fly, one of them realized he had eaten too much. If he was going to stay in the air, he had to get rid of some of the meat. And here's the thing about vultures. This one's looking pretty sick. Here's the thing about vultures. If one of them barfs, they all barf. This is true. In the end, Mrs. Crouch and the townspeople never heard an explanation that satisfied them. While the scientific specimens disappeared and most of the remains were thrown away or eaten by Ben, the town wondered, waited, and watched the skies, hoping another meat shower would leave better evidence. After a while, life went back to normal. The meat shower remained a point of pride in Olympia Springs, Kentucky. But everywhere else, people soon forgot about that strange, unexplainable day. It says, "Welcome to Olympia Springs, Kentucky, home of the meat shower." Oh, but what about our meat guy? Not me. I can't think of anything else. Of course, today, Mr. and Mrs. Crouch, Hungry Ben, and all the curious townfolk are long gone. They're a distant memory, but I'm still here. I remember hitting the ground surrounded by all the others, but I don't have the foggiest memory of what happened before that. All I can do is wonder as I stew in this dusty old jar on a museum shelf. Once I was in every newspaper from the Carolinas to California, but to the few who even notice me today, I'm little more than a curiosity. They squint their eyes and wrinkle their nose before they move on. Maybe meat will never fall from the sky again, but I still pray someone curious and clever is struck by that distant, fateful March day, and is hungry to solve my mystery. Because where there is mystery, there is hope. And as you've already clearly seen, anything can happen. So do me a favor and check the weather for tomorrow. I wonder if it's going to rain. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to the Courier-Journal for having me. Look for more story time with the Courier-Journal in your feed very soon. Thanks. I'm Mick Sullivan.